Hey guys, welcome back. We're headed back into the Underhive today as we paint this Orlock ganger with a shotgun. So the Orlocks were the other gang that shipped with the core box. That gotta be honest, I wasn't that in love with them conceptually. They seemed a little bit generic to me, but I think they were kind of important to serve as the baseline for the rest of the more outlandish gangs. You kind of always need in any setting to have somebody that embodies the concept in its entirety. And in that sense, the Orlocks really embody this sort of baseline for the setting. They're recognizably a gang. They draw on many tropes that you see in real life, I suppose. They've already got that gang look kind of nailed down, and they're pretty much what you would expect for any setting where you have some kind of an organized crime family sort of aesthetic. Plus, they really do look like they belong all of one set thanks to these bandanas and very distinctive styles of dress. And generally speaking, when painted in a straight color scheme, they look pretty good. Bold colors, kind of just core like primary colors, they kind of really do look quite impressive and do stand out on the tabletop really nicely next to the more outlandishly dressed Goliaths. So where the Goliaths are all about, size and strength and survival in the Underhive, the Orlocks are all about family values and trying to survive together as a group. In that sense, they mirror lots of real life gangs insofar as familial ties, uh, as well as just strength in numbers, really, in that sense, as opposed to the might makes right mentality of Goliaths, and that makes them such a great foil against a lot of the other more fractious and more infighting prone gangs of Necromunda. So when you look at the Orlocks, I think the most obvious thing is that there is a uniform going on, and yeah, you could say that of the same. That's kind of the same for all of the other factions. But I think for the other factions, they're sort of grouped by how they style themselves, or rather how different they are, or or how specific they are in the way they have traits and so on. So like the Goliaths are all of a kin because they're gigantic, right? The Escher are all of one tribe because, well, they are culturally very grouped together by the fact that their females have a genetic disposition to be more impressive and lead their house in that sense. When it comes to the Orlocks, really what you're seeing is that uh, they have a choice. It's the way they dress, the way they sort of align themselves, and the way they kind of have family ties that keep them together. They are very much the Fast and Furious 8 of Necromunda. And organized family crime, very reminiscent of mafia, very reminiscent of street gangs of parts of America. And yeah, the bandanas and the sort of common clothing kind of show that off. Also, the wife beater singlets. Make of that what you will. So we've just done the skin. That's just a combin. We've got this bird going absolutely apeshit. I hope you can hear him. But yeah, that's a local bird that we have in Singapore. Quite a distinctive call. But I hope that doesn't bother you too much. Let's move on to Gryphcharger Grey, which is what we'll do his denim pants in. We just got done with his cloth, with the flesh. Sorry, the flesh was the usual Guilliman Flesh with Seraphim Sepia, which is my standard Caucasian skin tone. Because for the most part, I think Orlocks look good in a simple color scheme. Just very few colors, just practical work clothing in that sense. And when it comes to work, what do Orlocks do? Essentially, they are called the House of Iron because they produce a lot of the metals. They mine, they smelt, they do a lot of the extraction, and they run the convoys to and from the slag heaps. And that is a really important part of their culture, and it's a part of the reason why they are so close knit. Because who would you trust out on the open roads to the ash wastes but somebody that you've basically formed long-term familial bonds with. It's something that you see in real life gangs as well, because in most of the most desperate and most dangerous places, that idea that your mafia sort of bonds because of familial bonds, and individuals who wish to join the gang need to be accepted as part of a family, kind of a key notion when it comes to real life gangs as well as in fictional ones. So that's why we accept the image being portrayed quite so easily for the Orlocks. And their clothing, their commonalities clearly just sort of sharpen this image that we have, and that's why they work conceptually as a gang, even more so than other gangs. Because what do your house corridor have to sort of like tie them together? Really, it's their religious beliefs, and it's their common poverty and just general downtrodden behavior. So it's really as much social class as it is religious fervor, so to speak. Uh, and that's kind of a unique selling point. So when it comes to Orlocks, it's their shared sense of loyalty that kind of ties them together, and that's kind of unique. It's not something that you see very often in like the 41st millennium at all, because familial ties are just not something that gets explored very often. There is a lot of might mix, right? There's a lot of like survival of the fittest, and there's a lot of depravity on display, but just that kind of familial closeness and ties, not really something that gets explored very often, and that's kind of why Orlocks are great. So I am slapping on a little bit of silver for most of his shotgun. I don't think this was always the case, but there's an affinity for Orlocks with shotguns, because shotguns are practical weapons and they're easy to carry, they're handy, and this guy's sort of double-barreled shotgun is no exception. Simple, uncomplicated, tried and tested weapons that produce the results that they want. The birds are going absolutely nuts because it's evening time here in Singapore. So I hope that doesn't bother you too much. It's either doorbells ringing or it's birds. Yeah. So we are putting on silver onto all of these shells, and we'll be shading these later to give them a little bit of color onto his belt buckle. And we'll run this by all of these shotgun shells. He's very prepared. This man has no shortage of ammunition, and I think that's part of the imagery of Orlocks as well. They're a well-to-do gang because of their ties. Whatever it is that they're doing, in keeping things in order in their gang, clearly appear to be working out, because this is a very well-provisioned ganger with his shotgun. It's more than enough shells. He's got an entire bandolier, and yeah. So bandolier is another giveaway, right? Because I think the real life kind of influences for this style of gang, the real life influence of this style of gang are very evident. Because, well, have a think about that for a minute, and it's pretty obvious who the inspiration is for this. In White Dwarf, as mentioned before in a previous video, I believe it was it Andy Chambers? It might have been, who mentioned like Jean-Claude Van Damme style street fighters as the inspiration, whereas the Orlocks were more of a Mad Max kind of faction. So yeah, there we go. It's pretty much out there, but clearly there's some real world influences as well, and they really do wear it on their sleeve. Okay, hairdryer time. So we're back. We're headed back in with a little bit more Gryphcharger Grey to define his pants a little bit more, and this time we're focused on creating shades on the surface of the model, a little bit of that crinkly sort of texture that you get with jeans, as they are very well worn. So a little bit on the back of the leg, and his jeans are curiously featureless. In fact, there's very little to suggest that he's wearing jeans. It's just the models in the White Dwarf really kind of had the White Dwarf where these guys were released, that is, really had quite clear references, I suppose, and I think that reinforces this use of like real life materials or emulating real life materials. I mean, really kind of cements their real life inspiration for the Orlocks. These guys are clearly like based on real life street gangs, and denim is a common material for the 80s. Or at least they're kind of based on what relatively well-to-do, quite separate people who don't have to deal with street gangs on a daily basis clearly thought street gangs in places like America would look like, right? So the mafia, the exaggerated mafia look, as well as the common sort of elements of gang uniform like the bandana, clearly things that are picked up from references found from around the world. But I think there is a very strong American element here, probably from, well, as Andy Chambers said, from movies, really, because there's a kind of faux gangsterism on display here, and that's kind of in keeping with the theme of Necromunda. It didn't always need to be the most grimdark setting, so long as it conveyed the whole ties of brothership, um, fellowship, and family values. I think that really conveys the idea that they're really going here conceptually, and that clearly is on display when it comes to looking at his attire and garb, because his entire gang is dressed and equipped much like him, and that kind of really shows what holds this gang together, what that sort of bedrock, that fabric that keeps these gangs together. That's really what we're exploring here when we look at miniatures from this particular range. So over his, I guess, tank top or sleeveless garment, he's got what is clearly a kind of leather jacket, and that's the beginning of his uniform, so to speak. He's also got what looks like a cut down kind of Kevlar vest. What we do have left are the very distinctively semicircular shaped shoulder pads, plus the sort of chest piece of this Kevlar vest. These again would have been probably cues lifted from a movie, simply because that's a surefire way of creating some kind of an alternate reality, futuristic kind of character. If they're in the 80s, at least 80s and 90s, would have been to give them like just big shoulder pads, outlandish outfits to sort of build that unique, unfamiliar yet familiar sort of silhouette, and to make him visible and recognizable as somebody from some kind of a combat setting, almost like a future soldier aesthetic. And I find that really works very effectively to create this image of a soldier that looks familiar yet unfamiliar to our eyes. And it's kind of cool because it all comes together to create a unique silhouette. And the bandana, of course, being the other major point of color, really helps to sort of cement this, or helps to accent this relatively reserved color scheme with what is essentially a spot of color or something unique, kind of like an emblem or like a Blood Bowl uniform almost. And to that end, you can pour a little bit of real life influence as well. So you could do red bandanas, you could do blue bandanas, or you can just do white bandanas. Although I kind of feel like white bandanas looks a little bit like the Karate Kid, so that may come across as a little bit strange. Yeah. So as mentioned, these guys run protection services for the convoys that head to and from the slag heaps of Necromunda in the ash wastes. So there are elements of Mad Max as well, and I guess that's basically where I see the influence for this particular jacket, this leather jacket, and these sort of like Kevlar plates over like Kevlar plates over denim jeans and a comfortable t-shirt sort of look. Very reminiscent of Mad Max. And then to that you sort of add the bandanas and the short cropped hairstyle, which is maybe something a little out of like kind of like that gang at the beginning of like Terminator, and a little bit of like Alien as well, with the sort of hodgepodge gear of the colonial marines, and you kind of get kind of where they're headed in for this, and it really works as an outfit. I think it looks ace, and it really brings across the idea. Cool. So shotgun is good. Let's jump back in and add a little bit more definition to the flesh with a second coat. Well, not a coat, but a second dose of our flesh mix of Guilliman Flesh Seraphim Sepia. And this time we're only going to focus on the sort of like shaded areas, the recesses of his muscle mass, just like we did with the denim. We're not broadcasting this over the general surface again, hoping to cover every single nook and cranny. That was for the first pass. The second pass tends to be a lot more directed and a little bit more specific, and we're trying to actively only get this in the darkest recesses where they belong, as we set ourselves up to prepare us for a highlight later on. So yeah. So I guess we've covered the essential conceptual differences between Necromunda, Orlocks, and Goliaths. The whole group dynamic, sort of like family above the individual. Not quite communist, but you sort of get the idea. The society above self kind of angle, and the needs of the few outweighing the needs of the many kind of concept for Orlocks. And then you've got the might mix, right? Everybody needs to survive as best they can on their own merit approach of the Goliaths. And I think that's the core paradigm of Necromunda's like first core box, which is you are really comparing two different ways of surviving what is essentially a very dangerous environment, which is the Underhive. And I think that's a pretty compelling way to start your core box. That clash of cultures, as it were. I like it. So just a little bit more emphasis on muscles for our boy. And I think we should be in a good place. Okay, one more hit with the hairdryer and then we can move on. Okay, with everything nice and dry, I'm going to jump into some Fyreslayer flesh, which is rapidly becoming my go-to color for any kind of leather, or just any kind of nondescript kind of organic looking fabrics that a miniature may have. I really do like the way it's kind of like saturated but not saturated in a way. It's kind of very far down the red spectrum, yet the raised areas kind of look fairly mild and subdued, which I guess it makes sense because this color was originally formulated for darker skin tones, I suppose, or non-human skin tones. I was going to say Fyreslayer flesh is a pretty big giveaway for what it was intended for. But yeah, I kind of like the way it looks for like leather strapping as well as bits of equipment like scabbards and bags, that kind of thing, So this looks pretty good to me. I want to do his belt in this color as well. At least the sort of leather bits of his belt, leaving behind the buckles in the original silver, or the bits that were picked out in silver rather. Cool. Now, as far as I can tell, all Orlocks have or appear to have dark hair, simply because the whole Italian mafia thing, or gang, like American street gang, I suppose. There was a very specific image of how they should look. So let's do that in yeah, let's pop a little bit of a rattling grime kind of color to it. So it's brown, but not quite brown. I'm drawing on Karate Kid. I think there is a little bit of Daniel-san in this poor ganger. I can't get away from it also because he's got this bandana and it reminds me of Ryu in Street Fighter. So I mean, all these things are a real hodgepodge of ideas, right? And basically, that kind of works on multiple levels, I suppose, when you consider that this guy is supposed to be, you know, fighting for his life in the Underhive. So it doesn't really matter. It kind of looks go with what you like the look of, I suppose, is the order of the day, and not get too hung up on your influences, because it turns out, and Games Workshop has showed us this, that mixing and matching your influences makes it something unique and a homage, whereas drawing too heavily from one well kind of makes it plagiarism. Because what does Games Workshop do in most cases but draw their influences from all over the shop, whether it's plundering historicals or it's essentially pulling out elements of Tolkien's lore, or from, it turns out, 80s movies. All of these individually do not protect their IP as best they should, I suppose, and therefore they become fair game for Games Workshop to draw these ideas. And once they've been put together, and to be fair, the Games Workshop designers also put a bit of a spin on them, made them kind of unique and their own, and basically didn't make them a one-for-one carbon copy. They did put a bit of their own unique spin to them. Therefore, these go on to become enduring ideas in and of themselves. And as time has gone on, to be fair, the Games Workshop designers of today have only lifted, or they lift primarily from the parts that were more original Games Workshop creations, as opposed to the ones which were, clearly lifted from movies like Alien or Terminator and so on. And that's the smart way to play this, right? Because it's only a problem if you kind of don't acknowledge your source material and move away from it as you try to become increasingly more IP savvy. So we're coming into detail his cloth material here. So I'm going to keep it in white because I think that works for the mix of source material that we're trying to draw upon, which is a lot of street gangs as well as that kind of mafia look. So just a little bit of shading with Gryphcharger Grey for the cloth, and that should put us in a good position to turn this into a white garment. It will be matched by his tank top or wife beater, as I like to imagine, over here just above. If we can keep the belt behaving normally. But to be fair, a few off colors does not go amiss, because as mentioned, these guys have a job, and sometimes they do have a job that gets messy. Essentially, they're running a protection racket for convoys. So I imagine there are times when the convoy needs protecting, and therefore these guys got to get out their boomsticks to show the other gangs what for. So which was your favorite gang? I know I personally gravitated more towards Goliath because I kind of like that sort of Mad Max aesthetic. I've been a huge fan of Mad Max for a long time. And like I mentioned at the start of this video, I kind of uncharitably called the Orlocks a little bit generic, because to me they felt like the straight man of the setting. They were just a little bit too recognizable, I suppose, from being present day. And not that that's a big problem, but I think when you wear your concept on your sleeve like that, I think that was less likely to capture young Kenneth, who was actually really more interested in unique world buildings and unusual settings. So yeah, the Goliaths did that a lot more for me, in my opinion. They were a lot more exciting, and just the idea of being able to paint all that muscle in a way reminiscent to orcs really kind of entertained me quite a bit. I do enjoy painting muscle on miniatures because it's just so craggy and unusual. And these guys who were really more about their equipment and clothing and their sort of gear appealed to me a lot less. I guess I like painting things which are weird as traits as opposed to as cultures. I don't really I love a little less the idea of painting clothing. I love far more the idea of painting weird monstrosities and mutations and so on. So that's always been my thing. So in that sense, the Goliath spoke to me a great deal more. Never mind the way they actually play it. I have to be honest with you, even though I had access to the miniatures and to the game set that I shared with a friend or friends, really. I never really actually played the game because we found the rule set kind of unfamiliar. We were playing 4th edition, and 4th edition was basically its own thing at the time, very separate from basically the 2nd edition based rules for Necromunda. So we found it just different and uncanny enough that we never actually quite got into any games of Necromunda, which was a pity. But we did build all the buildings and we did, our best to sort of play with color schemes, but we never quite got a gang um, game or two going on. We just kind of enjoyed the setting and read a lot of the lore, and we just kind of kept it at that. More's the pity, really. But we were quite young, we were in school, so yeah, it was, in retrospect, an amazing thing that we managed to get a hold of a copy of the game in the first place, because it was quite expensive. And on school pocket money, we saved and saved and saved until eventually we had enough to buy it as a group in my school at the time, secondary school, which would have meant that I would have been 13, 14, I suppose. I'm not sure. But yeah, I remember when this hit us. Yeah. So it was a long time ago. And all things considered, in my opinion, these models still paint up great. Like the details do hold up, they do look the part, and I really like the way they are shaping up in this painting video. I think they do look great, and they have continued to hold up to scrutiny quite nicely. To be honest, a lot of these models do still hold their own against modern releases, in my opinion. The style is very much different, don't get me wrong. And definitely, you've got a technical level of detail to modern sculpts. But I think what these models lack in terms of technical proficiency, I suppose, or complexity, I think they more than make up for in charm. After all, these are the models that that the more recent releases were clearly based on. And you can sort of see with the newer Orlocks, they kind of drew on the parts of these models that were a unique Games Workshop sort of mishmash, and really sort of went deeper into it a few steps. And I think that's the way to do it. Like I mentioned, make it your own. It may not have started as an original thing, or rather the influences were very obvious in the beginning. But the more you kind of lean into the aspects of this that are your own unique IP creation, then the more it starts to look like what it's supposed to be, which was basically something distinct from almost anything else. And that's kind of the way you have to play it over time. So kudos to Games Workshop for leaning into the parts of their concept that were unique and new, and expanding the fluff and storylines beyond the very straightforward sort of mafia origins, which is appropriate, I suppose, for a first edition. But as you kind of go on, you need to make it a little bit more nuanced. And yeah, these guys really still fit the bill in that sense. So a little bit more Fyreslayer flesh to create striations on the shoes. I do like the fact that the different factions have very clearly different shoes. Like Cawdor has almost medieval style shoes, and most of the Delac have shoes that have daggers tucked into them, or little sort of identifying features. The Goliath boots are mostly covered in armored greaves, and that just really suits their heavy punk aesthetic. Very very Mad Max, very survival first kind of approach, and that's good world building as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to need to drop a little bit more color into the area under his chin to define that. Yep, that's fine. And then a little bit more. So this bit under the shotgun, I've never really worked out what that was. I guess it's a molded plastic kind of structure, so it would make sense to do it in a kind of Nuln Oil sort of color. And I can extend this and blend it into the rest of the model as I apply this shade liberally over the gun barrels as well. When I say apply liberally, what I mean is apparently define the spaces between the two, because I think this gun is distinctive enough that it could do with a little bit more of a targeted approach. Maybe not an overall broadcast application of wash or shade, as the case may be. But it is really rather well designed insofar as the gun is clearly readable for what it is, and it's very obviously a sawed-off shotgun. That's cool. Shotguns are Terminator kind of like staples. There's a lot of notoriety gained in Terminator 1 and 2 because shotguns are just so practical and effective and urban combat ready. So yeah, they kind of look great. Okay, so I'm going to come back in to apply a highlight with the flesh, because it kind of could do with a bit more definition. It's rather wet. Humidity in Singapore has been going absolutely through the roof. So I've noticed that my paints do not seem to be drying out quite the same way. I think humidity today is at 100%, which is not uncommon for Singapore. It's just, I guess, the trade-off for living in a tropical paradise is it turns out that the rainforest does come into your home every now and then. It's just as well that the mosquitoes haven't started going as well, so that's good news. But otherwise, just the general damp is on full display, and all sorts of weird and wonderful insects are coming in to chill out for a bit of respite from the weather. Understandable, I suppose. Right, that bird that I was mentioning earlier, that's called a koel, Koel. It's a strange little beast that makes a very distinctive noise. Visually, they're not the most impressive looking birds, other than having really bright red eyes and a black, like a almost iridescent dark black plumage. I guess they would almost pass for small crows were you to see them. But that call is so unique and so special that I knew about their existence long before I even set eyes on one. So that's kind of cool. And I would imagine the name koel has to do with its call, right? It's kind of like onomatopoeic. Okay, so I need to dry this off because, yeah, like I said, my paint is very saturated with moisture. And I'll get back to you in a bit. Okay, we're back. So we're moving on to highlights as mentioned for the skin. So this is straight light flesh from AK, just to block in the highlights, and then we'll come back and we'll sort of blend these back in using a little bit more of the flesh contrast mix. For the fingers of his gloves. Yep. So we're gonna do his highlights on his fingers. His elbows. It's quite mild facial features actually. He doesn't look particularly like his face is very distinctive. Just generally good looking human features. Fairly balanced. Just as the gang is, I suppose. I guess as a faction, Orlocks aren't the most heavily themed or the most interesting, but they do have all the fundamentals that you need to make a really effective gang. But that never really appealed to me because they just kind of struck me as being fairly generic, not the most interesting to my mind. But of course, your mileage will vary. And if that's what you're into, then that's what you're into, I suppose. For me, I think I wanted a little bit more of outlandish characters. That's just a part of me, I think, that's been with me the whole time I've been in my hobby. I've collected Chaos Dwarves, I've collected Orcs and Goblins. I've done every one of the sort of more bestial and fringe factions like Beasts of Chaos. I'm very into weird sub-factions like Emperor's Children for 40k, but I've never gravitated towards the generic human. I did do Imperial Guard at one point, but I kind of did it my own way and basically converted everything so that they had a unique look to them, because just the idea of doing generic box standard humans in a sci-fi setting never worked for me at all. So the Orlocks never appealed. But I do have friends who are very into it, and no, they're not gang people. I think just the strong core values and frankly a slightly more rosy outlook on human nature meant that the faction really kind of appealed to him a lot more. And it's just never been something that I gravitated towards personally. So I'm putting a bit of Nuln Oil over the silver bits for the bandolier. It's okay if this goes on to the leather bits as well, because that provides extra shading and definition for a rather high detail part of the model. The bandolier does take pride of place over a lot of details. It's like second to the highlight, second to the topmost level of detail, right? And we talked in many videos in the past about how a well organized miniature has detail like organized into layers, and the bandolier is very close to the topmost layer because it sits over the clothing and therefore sits over the flesh. So it's kind of the penultimate layer. I think the only layer that sits above the bandolier in that sense is whatever is wielded in the model's hands, and that's the shotgun. And the sort of knife scabbard kind of rests over the bandolier as well, although that's debatable for sure. But the point is that it's clearly very high on the list of essential equipment, and that's one way that you sort of express what's important to a model, by picking and choosing what sits at the topmost levels of detail. And in the case of the bandolier, it's very high over the other materials on the surface of the miniature, therefore it's clearly important to them in terms of world building. being well provisioned and being well equipped is a very big part of Orlocks, because in a way they are extremely prepared and fairly well to do as a family. I guess I always preferred an underdog story, but that's just me. In game terms, I think Orlocks, they performed as you would expect. They are your typical well-equipped, well-furnished gang, and they had strong leadership, and they had lots of access to shooting skills because they certainly had a lot of practice on the road, and they kind of performed like you would expect. No preponderance of close combat or shooting. You get a mix of both, and they are just extremely versatile, which I suppose could be a thing. To be honest, they are a really good gang to learn fundamentals of Necromunda, because in a way, no avenue of development is ever close to them, even as they develop upward. You could spec a model into becoming a real combat monster. You could spec a model into becoming a really accurate shot. Or you could just kind of focus on other tech skills and trading and bartering and so on and so forth. All of these avenues were and do still remain open to Orlocks over the course of a campaign, so that's not a bad thing. In contrast, for example, Goliath went down very much a route of like close combat preponderance first, and then later on they sort of spec'd into shooting as basically that one genre-breaking skill. Bulging biceps really came into its own to allow their heavies to lay down covering fire and kind of break the mold of the gang. But to be fair, that couldn't have been 100% intended as well, because it does take the Goliaths down a very different route from the beginning. It just happened to be that one overperforming skill that kind of broke your mold in producing effective fighters. And after that, they became a real shoot from afar first, then close in for the kill when the enemy is suitably softened up, or else wade towards the enemy while forcing them to keep their heads down using your grenade launchers and heavy stubbers and other giant weapons, which the Goliaths wield with ease. No such benefits for the Orlocks. They have to earn their victories in the traditional sense by just a combination of good shooting and fighting stats, and their relatively strong commitment to their familial bonds, which is showcased by their high leadership and leadership-based skills. So Orlocks are really dwarves. Who are a faction that are neither bad at shooting nor close combat, and are marked by particularly high quality equipment and good leadership. And I can respect that. Or you have to respect that, because that's nasty. That's a nasty combination. Those have been my bugbear through most of my Games Workshop so-called career, because I tend to choose monstery or bestial factions, all of which generally struggle when put up against the strong fundamentals of dwarves. I've never really enjoyed the dwarf archetype. It's just the furthest from my appreciation, even though the miniatures themselves are kind of great. I need to paint more dwarves on this channel, actually, because they're so cute. Yes, or at least the early ones had so much humor and so much cuteness to them. So yeah, definitely on my checklist to paint a few more dwarves. Probably starting with the Marauder miniatures, armored dwarves, which are wonderful. And I guess will be the prototype for the later Ironbreakers. Cool. So I am just going to come in, spend a little bit more time with essentially a dark wash. This is essentially Nuln Oil, but at this stage it's been cut quite a bit. And I just want to make sure that there is enough definition across various areas on the miniature, and also to tone down the extent of some of the highlights and make sure that everything looks good in proportion, not too bright, not too dark, and not too silly looking. Because practical and efficient, just like mamas used to say, used to make, is basically what the Orlocks are all about. I guess that really means I'm more of a fly by the seat of my pants kind of player, right? Like, just good fundamentals bore me, and I'm looking for something of a, or more of a bestial or a wild kind of energy. That seems to have always been more interesting to me than just a bunch of well-prepared humans. That explains so much about my personality. Last few highlights on the skin. And I think we should be shortly good to go. I'm gonna do up the eyes today. I need to give my eyes a break. I had a long day working on commissions, so we will leave it as is. Sideburns. Fingertips. Cool. I think we are ready to rock with our shotgun Orlock ganger. So last bits on his fingers, and I think he's looking plenty good. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed watching me paint this guy. I think he is looking pretty snazzy and well, more than ready for his first firefight in Necromunda, in the Underhive, where the rats are. Okay guys, cheers. See you guys soon. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff if you enjoyed the video. I'll see you again soon. Bye.